Hey guys, I wanted to talk about the history of the GNR J50 tank engine. The reason is because when the Reverend W. Awdry created Thomas, he was originally a J50 which you can see in the wooden toy. This engine looked rather different from the character in the books and television series and had side tanks which sloped down to the front of the smoke box. He was painted teal green with yellow lining and carried the number 1 on his bunker on both sides in yellow and also carried the letters NW on his side tanks in yellow. When Thomas was first illustrated by Reginald Payne, he decided to base Thomas on the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway E2 class. Awdry was annoyed that Thomas was not the tank engine he had first drawn, but he was satisfied when Payne explained that he was drawn after a real prototype. I think it would have been interesting if Thomas had stayed a J50, but the E2 design has become iconic with the character, and I just can't see him as any other class of locomotive. The Great Northern Railway Class J23 was a class of 060T steam locomotive. They had long side tanks that came to the front of the smoke box, which sloped forwards to improve visibility and had a recess cut in to aid maintenance. The tanks increased the adhesive weight, which was particularly useful on intended steeply graded lines. Traditional Doncaster saddle tanks were rejected in favour of full-length side tanks. 40 were built by the Great Northern Railway (GNR) between 1913 and 1922, with a further 62 being added by the London and North Eastern Railway (LNER) between 1924 and 1939. They were given the nickname submarines due to their long tanks. For shunting and local goods work, the Great Northern Railway (GNR) had traditionally used saddle tank engines of the 060 wheel arrangement, the last of these, of GNR Class J13, having been built in 1909 to the designs of H.A. Ivatt, the GNR locomotive superintendent. Nigel Gresley succeeded Ivatt in 1911, and soon identified a need for engines to work the short-haul coal traffic in the West Riding of Yorkshire, the nature of which required that the locomotives also be suitable for shunting. He designed a new class of 060 tank engine, using side tanks instead of saddle tanks. Gresley had recently begun the rebuilding of the GNR Class L1082T locomotives with larger boilers, 4 feet 8 inches, 1.42 meters, in diameter, which left a number of 4 foot 2 inch, 1.27 meters, diameter boilers spare. 30 of these were used in the construction of the new goods tank engines between 1913 and 1919, when 10 more were built in 1922. These again used second-hand boilers, but 4 feet 5 inches, 1.35 meters, in diameter. On the GNR, both varieties were classified J23, but Vellner divided them into J51 with smaller boilers, and J50 with larger boilers. Vellner continued the construction of Class J50, building a further 62 up to 1939, only the first 10 of which were given second-hand boilers. Class J51 were rebuilt to Class J50 between 1929 and 1935. On the GNR, the numbers were 157 to 164, 166 to 176, 178, 211 to 230, these were increased by 3,000 by the LNER. The first 10 engines built by the LNER were numbered 32, 31 to 40, following on from the GNR engines, but those built from 1926 were given scattered numbers between 583 and 636, between 1037 and 1086, and 2789 to 94. In 1943, new numbers were allotted in a continuous block from 8,890 to 8,991. These numbers were applied between January and December 1946, but before this could be done, the oldest 10, numbers 3157 to 64/6/7 were temporarily renumbered 3180 to 9 in May and June 1945. They duly received their permanent numbers 8890 to 9 between June and December 1946. Under British Railways, the 1946 numbers were increased by 60,000. Gresley designed the Great Northern Railway (GNR) Class J23, LNER J51, 060T in 1913 for working the steeply graded lines in the West Riding. Designed to replace the J3, J4, and J7 tender locomotives, an 18.5 inches cylinder diameter was chosen to produce a greater power output. Also, as most of the work involved shunting and short-trip workings, Gresley chose a tank engine design. The prototype J51, number 3167, was also experimentally fitted with a 16-element Robinson superheater. Coal savings amounted to only 3.7%, and no further J51S or J50S were fitted with superheaters. The superheater was removed in 1930 when number 3167 was rebuilt as a J50, see below. At about grouping, 1923, 2 more batches of 10 each were built. Both batches were fitted with 4 feet 5 inches boilers with shorter fireboxes. These boilers were surplus after withdrawals and reboilerings of D4, J4, and J7 locomotives. The first 10 were built in 1922 just before grouping, and the second 10 were built in 1924. Although the GNR classified locomotives with both boiler sizes as Class J23, the LNER divided them into 2 classes. The locomotives with the wider boilers became Class J50. Between 1929 and 1935, the J51S were rebuilt as J50S with the larger 4 feet 5 inches boilers. All of the J50S and J51S were built at Doncaster except for the last 14 locomotives. These were built in 2 batches between 1938 and 1939 at Gorton. In the 1930s there had been a general shortfall in medium-sized shunting locomotive construction. Although the LNER kept planning new J50S, cancellations due to the Depression and various financial crises led to no new J50S between 1930 and 1938. Even though the 14 Gorton J50S were built at the end of the 1930s, the problem was not solved until the immediate post-war period when the LNER purchased 75 austerity J94060 STS. In 1923, it was found that the axle boxes on the J50S and J51S tended to run hot. A survey in the last quarter of 1923 found that 31.2% of the locomotives ran too hot. This was traced to the axle box journals that were the same size as those on the lighter and less powerful J52S. In January 1925, it was decided to fit 5 J50S with new driving wheels and axles with 7.75 inches diameter journals that were 7.5 inches long. Although the original bearings were kept on the leading and trailing axles, the larger bearings on the central axle proved sufficient to solve the problem. All new locomotives were built with the new bearing arrangement, and the existing locomotives were amended accordingly. In December 1939, Class J50 was divided into 4 subdivisions. J50/1 was used for the rebuilt J51/1S. J50/2 was used for the rebuilt J51/2S and the first 2 batches, 1,922/4, of J50S. J50/3 was used for the group standard steam-braked locomotives, and J50/4 for the group standard vacuum-braked locomotives. Intended for the West Riding, the initial J50 and J51 allocations were to Ardsley, Bradford, and Copley Hill. These engines were used for local goods and coal workings, with shunting at intermediate yards. They were also used for shunting the larger West Riding marshalling yards. During the 1920s, they were also occasionally used for passenger work, and for banking duties. The group standard J50S were allocated to Ardsley, Bradford, Copley Hill, Doncaster, and Eastfield. At about this time, some of the original J50S moved to Immingham. By 1935, the J50S were allocated to Ardsley, Bradford, Copley Hill, Immingham, Frodingham, Stratford, Woodford, and Eastfield. The last 2 batches were spread thinly amongst Norwich, Cambridge, Stratford, Doncaster, Copley Hill, Sheffield, Hitchin, Hornsey, Annesley, and Colwick. All of the J50s survived to nationalisation, 1948, when the allocations were to Ardsley, Bradford, Copley Hill, Doncaster, College, Frodingham, Stratford, Woodford, Annesley, Sheffield, St Margaret's, and Eastfield. Most were still allocated in the West Riding, with lesser numbers further afield. In 1952, 30 J50s were allocated to Hornsey to work transfer trips to the southern region. These engines also occasionally worked on empty coach workings between Hornsey and King's Cross. Withdrawals started in September 1958 with the arrival of diesel shunters. Withdrawals of regular locomotives were completed in September 1963, leaving only 7 departmental engines. The last departmental J50 was withdrawn in September 1965, when departmental number 14, X68961, was scrapped in September 1965. Well, that's all for today guys. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell for new uploads. All pictures used belong to their respective owners. Thanks for watching.